Hey, so welcome back. We really enjoyed our webinar today, and all of us were sitting and thinking about the webinar and our opportunities to think through um, the questions and know that we didn't have a chance to really get to all the questions, and so wanted to take this opportunity while we had it together to answer some more questions and also share a little bit of insight about our own perspectives from our representative set of expertise. So mine as a pediatrician, and then everyone else from their own perspectives as well. So first, we're gonna just kind of reintroduce ourselves in the event that we don't all know who each other are. And then also we'll talk about some of the questions that came through from our great participants. So I'm Kristen Soul. I'm a pediatrician that specializes in autism, both from the assessment standpoint as well as longitudinal care across the lifespan. And I serve as the executive director of a program called Echo Autism, and I am also the founder of that program. Alicia, if you'll go next.
Hi, I'm Alicia Curran. I am the Director of Operations of our Echo Autism program here at the University of Missouri, and I am also the mom of a 19-year-old with autism.
Great, thanks Alicia. Melinda?
Hi, I'm Melinda Odom. I'm a social worker, and I'm also the manager of our training. I am our training manager for our Echo Autism program.
Awesome, thanks Melinda. Rachel.
Hi everybody, I'm Rachel Brown. I'm the child and adolescent psychiatrist. I have been working with people with autism spectrum disorders, co-occurring psychiatric illnesses for many years and in lots of different settings. And I'm really happy to be part of the Echo Autism program and to work with all these wonderful ladies.
Awesome, thanks Rachel. And Renee.
I'm Renee Sorensen, psychologist at Cincinnati Children's. I specialize in the assessment and treatment of children with autism spectrum disorders and other developmental disabilities who have co-occurring severe behavior disorders. And I run a behavioral safety team in the medical center. And then I'm part of the Echo Autism Crisis Care Hub team.
Awesome.
Happy to be here today.
Yeah, thank you. So this is going to be much less formal than our webinar was. And for those of you who didn't have a chance to tune in, that's available on our website. And we would encourage you to hear all of the great tips that Renee shared with us about how to help our kids get back to school. This pandemic is really, I think, shaking all of our little worlds. And one of the things that we got to talk about during our question and answer time during the webinar was how do we handle uncertainty? And I think that's one of the biggest issues right now for all of us. It's an uncertain time. And so as we kind of walked through all the different strategies to support kids with autism going back to school, Renee gave a lot of practical tips and tools to doing that, everything from how do we help children wear a mask, how do we help prepare them, structure their days, routines, things like that. And, I just think it's a great time for us to think about just some of the other questions that came through. So I wanted to start us off. Some of the questions really thought a lot about, well, what about if new behaviors start to happen when the schools go back into session? And so, Renee, you touched on this some during the webinar itself, but for those parents who start to see new behaviors happening, are there specific strategies that you would recommend that they consider after school starts or as school's getting ready to ramp up that they should start thinking about using?
Absolutely, and we've definitely seen new behaviors occurring in this pandemic. So just from being home so long, we have seen parents who are saying, we're really struggling with new things that we weren't struggling with before, with the routine being so changed. I think I've talked to some of our webinar panelists about those things. So definitely it is a current problem, I think, and it's going to be ongoing when kids go back to school and the cafeteria has changed or the recess has changed, as well as all the additional requirements with hand washing and face mask wearing and how we know it's unfortunate, but we know that we're at risk for kids going back to school and then being pulled back into virtual learning if the rates get too high or the school gets severely impacted and then going back to in school. So there could be so much change going on, and I expect that we'll have a multitude of children who struggle with that. So I think the best thing we can do is remember that functional assessment of problem behavior is key. Providing kids with as much routine as possible. So when they're in and out of school, trying to keeping them on same routines or similar structure. It is not going to be the same at home and school. It is not. We understand that, but keeping their bedtimes, getting them up having their meals the same. So the structure of the day, trying to keep engagement, it may not be the same kind of engagement, but keeping engagement going. And then when you're having specific problem behaviors, doing that good functional assessment of what that looks like, what's driving those behaviors, you know, trying to figure out, are they trying to get attention because it looks different? Are they bored? You know, are they wanting specific tangible things or trying to control whatever they can control in a tangible situation because everything feels out of control? Typically, it's not as much too much demand placed for being home, but it can be going back to school for sure because the demands are very different. So we want to look at that good functional assessment and then put in strategies and procedures to assist with that. It needs to be a teaching perspective. We have to remember we're asking them to do all these different things. So this isn't the focus. You know, a lot of people like to think about consequences for behavior, and we may need some of those, but we really have to think about teaching and teaching replacement behaviors and giving them the accurate information and prevention of problem behavior in terms of how do we structure and gradually increase demands over time to ease them in and out of these situations with preparation. And it certainly will be challenging. And then also working broadly. So with our psychiatrists and our developmental pediatricians and our pediatricians, to help the kids navigate this. It's going to be a time of higher anxiety, stress for those kids who are worried about germs, and making sure that we're supporting them holistically across the continuum, medically, navigating the water. So it really is all hands on deck to help the kids navigate, I think, with these new strategies.
Great. Thanks, Renee. That's really helpful. Appreciate that. And so, you know, in thinking about these kiddos, and I thought your point about just kind of gradually working in strategies to help support them. So Alicia, this one's coming to you. Thinking about, you know, masks, and we know face coverings are a really important part of helping to keep kids safe. And one of our questions is about, can all kids wear a mask? And why does my child, the question specifically says, why does my child need to keep working on wearing a mask if they have sensory or behavioral issues that make it hard on them? And so kind of, I'd love to hear your perspective about that, both as a parent and then as a former teacher, and thinking about how you might address this parent's question. And I think it's a really good one, and one that I hear from my patients a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, you know, every family has their own view, their own values, their own experiences and whatnot that really build our, you know, our ideas of how important is a mask. From my parent point of view, I feel like this is a new world we live in. It looks very, very differently. And so, you know, we don't know how long we're going to have to wear masks. And so I think that for me, I think I'm doing my child a disservice if I don't help him try to accommodate into our new way of living. So, you know, my son has tons of sensory stuff. He's impacted greatly by autism. He has an intellectual disability. He has a lot of other co-occurring medical and psychiatric conditions and severe problem behavior at times. But what I found is that we've kind of taken it baby steps, and it's kind of just always been the process if we go out into the community. And, you know, here we are, 5-ish months in, and I don't have to tell him to put on his mask anymore. He's got his noise reduction headphones on, and when I grab mine and I start putting it on and I'm like, okay, let's go, he just grabs it, puts his little headphones up, puts it on, headphones back down, and off we go. Sometimes he's one that jibber jabbers all the time, so sometimes his little nose will peek out, but again, surprisingly, he will put it up on his own. I think, you know, I've taken time out to explain to him, Sam doesn't have a lot of verbal abilities, but the one thing that I know about working with kids, you know, lots of different kids with lots of different kind of autism and other disabilities, we should never discount what our kids understand. And from the very beginning, I have explained to him what COVID is, why we are doing things in a very, very different way, and telling him that this mask is keeping him safe and others safe. And I think he gets it, you know, I really, really do. And I think it's important that we continually talk to our kids about this stuff. I'll kind of disclose, I texted Renee in a panic one weekend because we just had been experiencing lots of problem behavior. And in our conversation, she identified, like, how much are you talking about this? And I hadn't, because we had kind of established what was going on and why our life was changing and why we had to do all these different things. And I kind of took advantage of him just kind of remembering that. But I will tell you that talking about it again, and again, I'm not getting much feedback because he has minimal verbal abilities, but it has reduced some anxiety. So, you know, my encouragement from, you know, knowing that the teachers are going to have their hands full. It's a tough job to teach anyway, but coming back in a very different situation, it's going to be really tough on them too. And they're responsible for all these kids and keeping them safe. So, you know, I think us encouraging that mask wearing, taking baby steps, taking those wins, reinforcing, you know, compliance and toleration of or tolerating masks, I think is really, really going to be important. And I think our kids will surprise us. You know, I think just having those conversations, partnering with your teacher is really, really important. Staying on the same page, demonstrating it yourself as you know, a good role model. I think that, yes, I do think all kids can wear a mask.
Awesome, thanks, that's really helpful. And so, you know, I think piggybacking on that answer, I'd love to hear from everyone when we're thinking about kids that maybe have less verbal ability, so more minimal verbal skills. What are some ways that you've seen them trying to communicate with you? And here's what I'm kind of getting at. So we know that times right now, are stressful. And so when parents are also stressed, what are some clues that their child who may not be able to verbally communicate with them as effectively, what are some clues that they might look for that their child is trying to also tell them that they're stressed? So this doesn't need to be like long-winded answers. These can be kind of more, you know, just some clues that parents can be looking for. So I'd love to hear from each of you. So let's start, Rachel, if you don't mind, we'll start with you.
So I think that the changes in routine are tough. But the other thing is that when you're stressed, your routines change. So, you know, we're all of us set into, you know, this is when we sleep and this is when we do, this is when we're hungry. When you're stressed, those things just go. So you don't sleep as well, you wake more, you're not hungry at the same time. Sometimes your bodily functions even change. You have pains when you wouldn't otherwise have pains. Those kinds of things, I think I see that quite a lot. And I see that in, you know, people with autism spectrum disorders, and sometimes that's the only clue if somebody's nonverbal, but we all of us have those experiences. You're not sleeping as well, you're more moody, you're more irritable, it's harder to soothe yourself with the things you normally do, those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Melinda, how about you? What are the things you've seen?
Yeah, I've seen some of those same things, and just more behaviors, more, and the opposite as well, more neediness and more wanting to be near parents and being close, and not wanting to go off and do things independently because there's that anxiety. And I think that, you know, it's really important right now for people who are in the position to help families get connected to mental health services. That's so important right now, because children are having those feelings of anxiety and depression, but parents are as well. And so, you know, coming from a social work perspective, this is why it's so important to reach out to families and make sure the entire family is connected with mental health services. And so I feel that that's really important for those case managers and social workers right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Melinda. Renee, how about you?
I think increased irritability can often be seen. So things that might have triggered behavior previously are a shorter fuse to those triggers. So less tolerability for in general changes in routine that they might otherwise have tolerated. Things that come out of the blue without explanation. So kind of you know, parents are like, whoa, where did this come from? Because they can often understand and predict behavior pretty well because they know their kids so well. And this stuff can come out of the blue. And again, we have some kids who shut down. So we see them become more actually lethargic and less engaged in different activities. Not a true lethargy in terms of looking ill, but I should couch that with just more shut down. They might sleep more, be withdrawn more. Others might actually become more hyper and just have more trouble with general regulation because they're amped with the anxiety. So it can go all different realms, but it truly is anxiety is a change from baseline. So I think you're looking at those changes from baseline that you cannot otherwise explain. And that is typically anxiety and in these kinds of situations. So if they have some baseline anxiety, that's their baseline. And then we're looking with this kind of anxiety, a change from that typical baseline of where they normally sit under normal conditions.
Yeah, I think those are great points. Nisha, how about you? What are things that you see?
Yeah, all of the things that everyone else has talked about. You know, the repetitiveness, you know, the repetitive behaviors, those things that like he would get a little repetitive or obsessive about something and I could interrupt and redirect. In COVID times, not so much. It's a huge fight. You know, I think boredom and it sparks the most behavior, and those things that Renee's talks about, you know, behaviors coming out of nowhere. Sometimes I think it's boredom is the function of that behavior. And so I've seen certainly more of that, especially for me. I'm working all day. I still have a job, and you know, I have to kind of set up some routine for him and work, and he wants my attention, right? So we reinforce heavy at the end of the day and do some special things. And, you know, we remind of those reinforcers, which has been really, really helpful, but not flawless for sure. I can manage my child's behavior quite well, but I have found it very, very challenging during COVID.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So we are getting through most of our questions, mostly because a lot of them are kind of similar in their content, but I wanted to save the kind of this last course for all of us to kind of weigh in on. So as a pediatrician, I will weigh in on a little bit of the actual infectious disease threads of these, but then I want to have each of us reflect as moms on how we are thinking about going back to school. So first, some of the questions were about, you know, what is the whole deal with face coverings and social distancing, and how important is that? And so, you know, I think that the take-home message around that is that right now is our best line of defense for this new virus, right? So people talk about novel coronavirus. Well, novel just means never before seen, never ever been around, you know? And so no scientist has ever seen it. We don't know how it behaves. We don't really know a whole lot about it. So that's why there's so much confusion. And because we don't have any tried and true methods to keep us safe, we have to fall back on things that have been used for hundreds of years, which are things like social distancing, which is just a fancy way of saying keep your distance from other people. And why? It's because when we breathe or cough or sneeze or other things, talk loudly, we let out droplets of spit, and in our spit is the virus. And unfortunately, that is what can spread it from person to person. And every different kind of virus has a different level of infection that it can spread. So those face coverings, even though they're not perfect, they limit our ability to spread it because it keeps our spit to us essentially. And so that's the real reason behind the face coverings and the keeping our 6 feet or so distance from each other. So really important, because right now that's about all we have. And until we can come up with better treatments and better, vaccinations, things like that to protect us, that's the reason that's so important. So when we think about going back to school, yeah, there are a lot of challenges in that. Again, you've heard about all those, so I won't rehash them, but those are the reasons why we keep talking about the importance of masks and trying to keep ourselves distanced from others. Now, the other big thing I think about infection and as it plays into our decision making for our own children, your own children, my own children, things like that, is the volume or the number of people in our own community who are being currently infected with COVID-19. This is a really big piece to our decision. If you live in what's called a hotspot or a place that's surging or any of these other verbs and words that are going around, then that is going to be a big deal in the relationship to your decision and in your school district's decision and all of those other things as we decide what's best for our families and our communities. So what does that mean? That means that your chances of getting COVID-19 or however many people are in your community who have COVID-19 are higher. So your rate of community spread is what most people refer to it as. That's an important thing to understand. Your news, likely, your local news is probably going to report it every single day. So the number of new cases, the percent of cases positive, those are the numbers that you're going to hear. And that's an important thing to understand. If you're in a place that only has 1 or 2 cases, well, then that should play into your decision about what to do for your child going back to school. If you're in a place that has thousands of cases active, that also should play into your decision. And that's certainly something that we're about to now talk through as professionals from our different respective walks of life, me as a pediatrician, Rachel as a psychiatrist, and et cetera. And we'll share with you kind of how we've been thinking about this. And so I thought I'd start, since I'm the pediatrician, and share with you just how I've been thinking about it. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is still a moving target, literally every day, moving target. So I have a daughter, I have 2 kids, but one is in college, and that's a little bit of a different scenario as we work on that decision process. So I'm going to speak more to my daughter who's still in the K to 12 age range. She's a middle schooler. And so in thinking about her, I definitely am weighing her social emotional needs. She really, really wants to be with her friends. And while I personally think that is lower on the decision tree from a risk benefit, she does not. And so there's a lot of negotiation that happens at this house. And I then have to kind of think through my own ability to take a risk with her life based on our community spread numbers. Our community right now doesn't have a huge volume of cases. And so, I mean, it's kind of fluctuating at the moment. And I'm currently fairly well socially distanced because I'm able to do most of my work virtually, but I have an elderly father. So I have to decide, am I going to be willing to not see him at all? Because he lives in town. And so if she's going to be getting exposed every day, what does that mean? How is this going to play out? So these are all the decision pieces that I have to consider. And again, she knows that at any given moment, I might change my mind, because if the numbers and community spread go up, or if whatever variable might change, I will reserve the right to change my mind. So right now, she is planning to go back to in-person school, and they're going to wear a mask. We have a mask ordinance in town, all of those things. And that's the way I've made my decision. So I'm hoping that that's a kind of helpful. I mean, I know I'm explaining to you how I got to my thought process. I don't know how helpful that is, but, as a pediatrician, it's the same struggle that everyone makes. Now, you've heard me say in the webinar, and I'll repeat it here, I know as a pediatrician, the best place for a child is in school, right? Social, emotional, physical, and academic well-being is going to be in seat, in school learning. Yes, that is true. And yet I have a lot of other decision points I need to think about as a mom and as a pediatrician, frankly. Community spread, all of those other factors that I just walked you through. So of course, yes, best place for that kiddo, any kiddo, in school. And yet there are balancing factors that I think we all have to think about. So that's kind of how I got to my decision. And again, I may completely change my mind before school actually opens, but that's where I'm at this moment. So who wants to go next, ladies? All right, Melinda, how'd you decide?
Very similar to you, Kristen, we made the decision that social emotional need outweighed, not necessarily outweighed, but we kind of thought about that as we made the decision. In our school district, we do have the opportunity to choose in person or online. And frankly, our son, he would probably be fine doing online, but we felt for his benefit, he really needed to be back at school socializing because just that fits with his personality and his needs. We ended up also choosing to allow him recently to go to a camp and had to think through all of those things as well. And what was it safe? What precautions were being put in place? And so for our family, it really has been use masks, be cautious, but we are going to move forward with him going to school. So I think that's what we've decided for now. Again, like you, Kristen, we could change our mind if numbers go up, and we always have the option to pull him and have him start a virtual program if that's necessary.
Great, thanks, Melinda. Rachel, I know you have to go see a patient here in a short bit, so why don't you go next?
Yeah, so we're in a little different situation. My daughter's 21 and she's in community college and living at home, and I work in Wichita and commute weekly, so I'm back to Columbia. So, you know, we're in two different communities, and although Kansas and Missouri are kind of not that much different, there are slightly different places in the trajectory actually, and Wichita has a little bit of a surge been going on the last couple of weeks, and there's been some people at my work. I chose to continue to work and to go to work every day. It seemed important that if I was expecting our faculty and residents to go to work, that I should be at work as well. So I've done that. I really probably need that. And my daughter works in a grocery store, so she's an essential worker as well. And probably also needs, I mean, one of the things that I think we've borne in mind in how much to get out and how much to not get out is to do with what each of us can tolerate in terms of isolation. And so I'm not very tolerant of isolationness, and nor is my daughter, but my husband is probably as introverted a person as you can get. And so working at home in the basement is perfectly fine with him, and he's done quite a bit of that. But that was one of the things I think I'd probably add into the mix is and for ourselves and also for our kids as well, is just how tolerant how much do each of us really need to be around people. And I need to be around people, and I need a routine. And you know, I decided to go back to the gym fairly early on, as soon as they allowed us to do it, because it's like, I need that stress relief. I got to go somewhere and lift a little few weights here and there. And because if I do that, then I worry less, and I sleep better, and I eat better, and the routine is better. And it's just better for me. So we've had a couple of scares because there have been people, each of us actually in our respective work and social environments have had some maybe, you know, like one distant exposures. So, and our house is big enough, we kind of set it up so we can socially distance if we need to inside the house. And my daughter had a couple of weeks where she wandered around the house wearing a mask and didn't come out of her bedroom for a little bit, which is not that unusual actually for a teenager. One of the good things that I think that kids have these days, especially the teenagers, is an awful lot of connection through social media. That she's very, very good at it and much better at it than I am. So that's really been actually a real positive for her, that she's been able to utilize that. So, and like everybody, you know, we had decided at the beginning that if I got an exposure at work, then I might not go home for a couple of weeks, and I would stay, you know, here, and you know, similarly for each of us. And it's not easy, but it's important to really be as proactive as we can be, and to make a plan, and then to change the plan if we need to change the plan. So that's where I'm at.
Perfect. Thank you. And, you know, I think that that is exactly what we said earlier on the whole idea of planning and families planning and trying to figure out, you know, what are your plan A and B and C. You know, something that I think is worth pointing out, right? We are sharing with you our experiences. We are well aware that we live in the Midwest, all of us, between Kansas, Missouri, and Ohio. And we also come from a relatively privileged background. And so we want to make it very clear that we recognize that we do not represent every perspective, every position, every vantage point of this scenario. And we do very much understand that there are people who do not have the ability to choose to stay at home or to have their child educated virtually or all of those other perspectives, or be, you know, safe at home during those days, during the day, you know. So what I am abundantly aware of is that this is a complex situation, and that we are sharing with you perspectives that are very much of a perspective that is not universal. And so I want to make that very clear. I still think it's useful to hear our perspectives, but please know that we are not at all saying that this is a one size fits all perspective. And we know that unfortunately this COVID situation in our schools and whatever have literally extra magnified our inequities in our school system, our health system, and everything in between. And we also know, and I know very well, that the rates of child abuse, the rates of food insecurity, the rates of hunger, which is the consequence of food insecurity, are just astronomical right now. And so I think that my message to those who are listening right now is that if you come from a background that's similar to those of us, the ladies that you're hearing right now, that's great. But remember that there are many, many others who do not share this background, and they are facing decisions also. Decisions about that they have elderly mothers and fathers living in their homes with them, that they have to make a decision that may or may not end up really causing death to their loved one. Or there are many scenarios, and we have to be kind with one another. And that's something that I think we cannot underestimate during this time. And that includes the teachers. Our teachers also are struggling with this same thing. Many of our teachers have their own underlying health conditions, or again, they have their elderly parent living in their home. And so they're scared. And so that same concept that we talked about with our children being scared and maybe not knowing how to express it, we are all scared because we don't know. And this is an uncertainty that none of us have ever experienced before. So that important take-home message that yes, you're hearing our perspectives, but it's not just the only perspective. And so I want to round out our time together hearing two more perspectives, but recall that that's not the only perspective out there. So Renee, if you will share your thoughts, and then Alicia, if you'll wrap us up.
So I'm the parent of a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old, and so we are transitioning into high school and in high school. Definitely our district currently, and I say currently because it can always change. They're managing rates right now, and Ohio is on a pretty big upward trend in our county, has been in what we call the red zone for several weeks. So they're currently allowing us to choose between fully in school and then a virtual learning academy, and then you can switch it semester. But knowing that if the rate gets too high, they will actually move everybody to virtual. So, you know, I weighed in with my children and included their viewpoint, which was only one viewpoint, which was go back to school, please. And had lots of conversations around the responsibility that required of them. So they're old enough to say yes, so I can allow that to be, I can hear that, but you have to own a certain level of responsibility with that. Now my son he's a football player, and he has been practicing for a month. They're moving now into, this week is mini camp, and next week starts the normal 2-a-days. They are socially distanced, only in the sense that they're not as many kids in the weight room. They're cleaned between. They're hand sanitizing when they walk in, when they go out, but they're not masked. And they shouldn't be, because they're in 90-degree heat running around, and I don't, that would be ridiculous. But, it's a risk. And we've had exposure in our family, direct exposure to COVID in our family. And so we've had to manage 2-week quarantines and go through that process, which is, I'm really glad we've done it before school hit. I thought I had a good plan, and I learned a lot of things during that as well, just having to navigate it. That helped guide some of the information given yesterday in the webinar. But I think it's really important to be thinking about all of this, because as we go through this year, exposure risk might be high in your area. Right now, our zip codes are pretty manageable, so I feel comfortable with the plan we made. That was one of the reasons I felt more comfortable. I do have one of my children has a genetic disorder, so we are in a risk factor for that, and so hard decision. I also have one child that would probably do fine with virtual learning, and another one that is going to struggle with virtual learning. So taking all those things into account is important, and choosing and knowing what our risk factors in, and then really with the kids that you can, talking about the responsibility of it. For some of our kids, they can't own a lot of responsibility, and we do just keep working on those skills and strategies. But it's a choice. My oldest also works in a grocery store, and of course wanted to get a job, and it's in the middle of a pandemic. But part of that factor was, again, choosing, interviewing and then taking a job where they require a lot of those really good procedures. So again, making a decision of an employer that's supporting really good practice. And I work in a hospital, and I'm in and out, and I have helped test COVID children who are symptomatic for COVID who need behavioral support. So been in those rooms with the PPE on and have been fine. So it gives me confidence in our mask wearing and in the things that we're doing to make those decisions. That has helped me face some fear, I guess, of when you do the right thing, you can do it safely and limit your exposure. So those are the things weighing in. But again, this is evolving, and I guess I'm prepared to change my mind at any point in time. And I respect anybody who chooses to do virtual learning, to chooses just to send their kids, and all of the things in between. I think I wish we could give a black and white game plan, but I think all we can do is work on it. I do want to mention one thing. I was alerted today that the CDC is putting on a link on their webpage for some problem solving strategies or plans for parents of kids with disabilities. That's coming up soon, so be aware of that page and that new link coming up.
Good, great. Thank you for sharing that. I hadn't heard that yet. That's awesome. Thank you. Okay, so Alicia, we're just about done with our time together after our, what we like to call the after the show. And so Alicia, if you will share with us kind of your thoughts and that perspective of having a young man on the spectrum and how you're thinking about going back to school.
So life's about how you handle Plan B. I have a virtual background because now Sam has decided he wants to be close to me in his pajamas during my webinar after the show. So again, as an autism mom, I've prepped for this, right? Like I always know that what I think is gonna happen might not. So, I think for all of us, that's a great lesson. Know that you can change your mind. Flexibility, we have to be flexible as autism moms. I don't think there's a mom that I've met or a dad that I've met that flexibility wasn't a key characteristic for this journey. But I think we're flexible and that we can change our minds. For me, I read the research. I know that people with developmental disabilities are at a higher risk. My son has asthma, although it's well controlled. That's another risk factor. He's got other medical and conditions. And so, yes, I know it's a great risk, but as a parent, I always think about that potential benefit and how that risk weighs in. So with all those things, you would think, well, she's crazy for sending her kid to school. It's pretty clear. I have watched my son deteriorate in front of my eyes for the past 6 months. or 5 months. You know, he loves school. He wants to go to school. And then one day he goes and one day he doesn't. And it's really tough to make those decisions. He begs me to go to school every single day, begs. I have seen him get really sad. I have seen these behaviors that, yeah, I mean, he's a kid with behaviors, but nothing like we've seen. It's heartbreaking. So, you know, at the end of the day, this is my experience. I feel this way because it's my experience. And I think it is really, really important for every single one of us to know that everybody has a different experience. Even those kids, parents without autism, every single one of us right here today have different experiences. We have different backgrounds. We have different needs. And I think we should be kind to everyone, even if they don't have the opinion that we do. And respect that opinion, because again, we come from different backgrounds and have morals and values that may be different. And I think, you know, supporting each other is key. And you know, my decision is my decision. However, if we have a huge spike in our community, even with what I've said that, you know, is upsetting to me and upsetting to my son, it may be that I have to pull him out again. So I think there's no hard and clear answer. I like to make a plan and stick to it, but I've learned in my years of being an autism mom, throw that playbook out the window because it never happens, right? So, you know, I think at the end of the day, just us remembering that every one of us, none of us have ever experienced this. Parents are going to be supportive of virtual, parents are going to be supportive of in-person. There's going to be some people that are really supportive of masks, some people that are not convinced and not. And I think that we just need to be respectful because we're all in this together.
And with that, we are so glad that you're able to tune in. We hope that this has been helpful for you, and stay tuned. We will be announcing our upcoming webinars soon, and we are really thankful that you have been able to join us, and we hope that you will join us next time. So thank you all. Take care and be safe.